There are a lot of words that come to mind when we think about Frankie Edgar, and one can't help think what a legend he is and how influential he's been into the sport. And some of the fights, obviously the Gray Maynard trilogy, have been impeccable, like astronomical in terms of his impact to the UFC and MMA as a whole. So obviously his move to bantamweight was greeted with some skepticism may not be the word, but intrigue. And his fight against Pedro Munoz was really going to be the first step to see if his style really translated at this new weight class. And I think the first two rounds of this particular fight really showed there. And the answer was a resounding yes. Frankie Edgar was the Frankie Edgar of old in this 2-2 fights. In these two rounds, rather. He was moving and shifting very well. And, when you watch a technician, and technician is the word in Frankie Edgar fight, you really have an appreciation for striking and combination striking, which is something that you don't necessarily see done at a very high level in any promotion, much less the UFC. You often see a lot of power punches and straight sticks. With Frankie Edgar, you're getting a minimum of 2 to 3 to 5 combinations, and it's great to see. And in the first two rounds, at least from my perspective, you were able to see Frankie Edgar really take control of the boxing range, and both of these guys really predominantly utilize boxing as the modus operandi in terms of the damage that they dealt. Obviously, Pedro Munoz integrating a really strong low kicking game, which effectively left Frankie paralyzed towards the end of this particular five-round fight. But yeah, talking specifically about these first two rounds, there was a real comfort zone in terms of the striking that Frankie was administering. And I think more interestingly, you saw two real narratives here. One was Pedro Munoz really taking control of the center of the octagon and pushing Frankie towards the end of the octagon. But interestingly enough, when you have a fighter rather, such as Frankie, that's able to really shift and move really quite succinctly, and he's got these strafes. It's not quite Dominic Cruz-esque, but he's got real good movement, especially on the back foot. Frankie is able to really shift the distance quite well, and he was able to integrate that in some really crisp combination striking. And in the first couple of rounds, he was getting there first. He was really getting there first and laying it on Pedro. And obviously there was a differential in terms of the strength and the impact of the strikes. When Pedro landed, it hit flush, and it did hurt Frankie more. But Frankie was able to get in the pocket and get in first. He was able to get in first, touch Pedro quickly with a couple of combinations and get out. Get out, move, stick, get out, move, stick, get out. Obviously integrating combinations. And the interesting punch combination that he was able to use was, the 1-2s were there, and they were there quite often, and he was finishing them off the third, fourth combination, and even the first, second. But the integration of the uppercuts, and the uppercuts is a punch that you don't necessarily, you see a lot of jabbing, you obviously see a lot of straight rights and overhead, right? But the uppercut is something that you don't necessarily see, and he was really finding a home for that. It was really interesting. Within boxing range, he would come in and come with his uppercuts, and the integration of the wrestling as well, especially in the third, just to break things up. And I don't think his takedown percentages were very good, but granted, like, Frankie looked really sharp in the totality of this particular fight. His gas tank really wore quite well, and for Pedro, I think, interestingly enough, he was a victim of his comfort level in the fight, meaning that while he was getting touched up quite frequently, he didn't feel at any one point that he was at danger of losing the fight. And I think that actually played to his downfall, because he kept persisting with, the techniques that he was working quite well. And I've got to say that this fight was a split decision, so it wasn't like Frankie kind of ran away with that. But I guess the totality of damage definitely did take its toll on Pedro from, a physical standpoint, but also from a standpoint of the judges, because it's really, when you look at front optics in terms of how judges look at things, while definitely there's no doubt in the fourth and fifth round, you could visibly see Frankie limping, because the leg kicks that Pedro were administering were monster. Like, they were over and over again, and obviously the pace was quite torrid, but these guys were laying on a pace over 5 rounds. Bantamweights, those lower weight divisions have heat, and the gas tanks for some of the top guys, which now you can put Frankie Edgar there. Even at the age of 38, he's really come a long way, and he looked really good. I think the matchmakers had it right, and this was a really strong, a strong fight and strong debut for Frankie. But he was able to fight a really aesthetically pleasing fight. He was able to, for the most part, avoid most of the power punches for Pedro. And when he kind of got there, he was able to wear them well. And I think this is really important, especially in the eyes of the judges. But Frankie came with a style that he is that he has laid down in the past, but he was able to come with new wrinkles. You saw spinning kicks there. I've never seen Frankie Edgar do spinning kicks, at least, integrate them as well as he did. So, the totality of it kind of laid and wore on Pedro. On Pedro's part, there was no doubt that towards those back rounds, he was coming in a bit strong. And again, I think that comfort level, the fact that none of the combinations, while they were wearing on him, did have any fight-ending implications at any one time, kind of led Pedro to go down this path, which one would think, again, from different angles and perspectives, that it wasn't the worst, right? He was controlling the octagon. He was trying to cut Frankie off. He was playing high levels. He was playing high stakes chess, a la Whitaker and Till. There were a lot of feints going on, but he just wasn't able to land that fight-ending blow. And at this particular level, that really happens. So it was really memorable to see Frankie get into the win column. But I think more importantly, the fact that this was a high-quality fight over 5 rounds. It was non-stop action. It was entertaining. You saw technique. You saw competitiveness at the highest sort of level, and you saw two guys that were willing to trade in the pocket and fight in a very entertaining manner. So a split decisions win, but by no means, clear cut in that particular regard. And a fair amount of pundits out in the media obviously had it for Munoz as well. And to me, I thought Frankie won it in totality after seeing the fight. And it's just great when you see a legend such as Frankie Edgar get into the win column. He's such a great guy, and it's very hard not to root for Frankie. So where does he go from here? Look, it's interesting. Bantamweight is heating up. There are a lot of guys. I mean, Cheetah's just come off a win. It's interesting because they've given him Pedro, and Pedro's number 5. So arguably you'd want from 5 onwards. But in my mind, I think you kind of want to test Frankie maybe a little bit more. Around the Cheeto range looks good. Again, there are a lot of killers in that particular division. And where does Pedro go from here? Well, look, that was a close fight. And there's no doubt that he might want to run it back in again. I don't think Frankie would, but it's really interesting, and that division looks kind of set, especially with the announcement, or the faux announcement, that Dana said that Aljamain is next on the line to challenge rather for Pedion. Look, that's my analysis of the fight, guys. Leave some comments below. Give us a thumbs up. Tell us what you think. Who do you think Frankie should fight next? And just what are your thoughts about Edgar? Talk soon, guys. Peace.